Welcome to the Story Each Day podcast. I'm the author of these stories and your host, Nicholas Voyta Sailer. Thanks so much for tuning into the second story. This story is called Lines of Paint in My Mind, and I wrote it July 30th, 2014, so about midway through the project. This story is actually one of the ones that I think of the most when I think of this project. It captures a lot of what I went through in my personal life while I was writing all of these stories. So I'll go ahead and read through it, and then I'll talk a little bit about what was going on in my life as I wrote it. Lines of Paint in My Mind, written on July 30th, 2014, for A Story Each Day. The streets of Raleigh are marked and lined with construction spray paint, the kind that workers use to denote where electrical wires are buried, where to dig and where not to dig, where it's okay to drill and where it's not okay to drill, where the water lines run and where there's nothing but plain old dirt. Raleigh is growing and expanding by the minute, and by the time one building is finished, they start tearing up the lot right next to it and start something new. But for every line of construction spray paint that's put down, it's inevitable that they'd miss one, isn't it? Of course it is. Somehow, the line that was supposed to denote where the main water pipe is on our street never got marked. I woke up one morning, turned on the faucet to brush my teeth, and no water came out. I stepped outside to see a flood of water pouring down our street, turning the road into a shallow river. I looked upstream to see a crew of construction workers staring down into a hole in the ground. One held a jackhammer, one held a shovel, and one held a sandwich. I wandered up to them, still clothed only in gym shorts and an old, faded X-Men t-shirt. "Any idea when the water's coming back on?" I asked, trying to sound respectful. "Your guess is as good as mine," the one with the sandwich muttered between bites. "We're trying to get this thing fixed as fast as we can, but it could take all day." "What happened?" "Idiot didn't mark it. Marked all the other spots, but missed this one, so we thought it was clear. Idiot." I frowned, looking at the steady spring of water shooting out of the ground. I turned around and went back inside, trying to pretend like I hadn't missed several vital parts of my morning routine. While I should have been in the shower, or brushing my teeth, or at least on my second cup of coffee, I imagined all of the places where there are missing construction markers painted onto the ground. The street in front of my house isn't the only place that doesn't have markings, telling workers where they should be going and where they shouldn't be going. I'm pretty sure that if there is a God, he forgot a couple of spray-painted lines in my life. No doubt, someone as productive as God would be building and growing things all the time, wouldn't he? He has the entire world to look after, and millions of people asking him for things every single day. It only makes sense that he'd have someone else mark the pavement in the minds of the people he's working on. And with all of those people, it only makes sense that somewhere there'd be a line that somebody missed. So when God finally gets to me, he starts building full force, knocking down old ruins and drilling down into the dirt of my mind to secure the foundations of whatever the hell he's building. The street in front of my house isn't the only place that's missing some guiding lines of paint. And so for all of God's good intentions, he hits the main water line and turns the street in my mind into a river. My thoughts wash through the street, flooding the sidewalks and rushing over those memories that won't budge. Secrets I'd buried years ago become unearthed, and those hidden grudges I thought were safe and secure wash to the top. That time I lied to my dad bubbles right to the surface, along with that relationship with that girl I haven't talked to in years, but have thought about every day since. My mother drifts past, followed by all the times I ignored her when all she wanted was to get to know her son. They wash by, and I'm left standing in a soggy front yard, surrounded by fragments of trash and litter I thought were long gone by now. I stare at the river rushing through the front lawn of my mind, just wishing I could brush my freaking teeth. I begin to wonder whether or not this was part of God's plan all along, or whether somebody just forgot to tell him where the waterline was. I wrote this story right after I moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is the city where this story is set fictionally. Although there are a number of things about the setting that are actually accurate. When I wrote this story in 2014, downtown Raleigh, which was where I was living, was basically entirely under construction. There were so many new buildings being built and roads being repaved and rearranged that it was hard to go anywhere in the city without seeing a construction site. To some degree, it's still like that, but in 2014, that was definitely the case. And I was living downtown and working about half a mile away, and so every day I would walk half a mile through downtown, and I would see all of these construction sites. And one of the things that I was trying to do when I was writing a lot of these stories was look for something in the world that we all interact with, and then try to find almost like a parallel, or use that reality to parallel something that was going on in the character's life. And so in this case, it's the construction. And I looked around in Raleigh and recognized, wow, there's so much growth and construction going on. What would happen if I used the analogy of construction to symbolize what was going on in this character's life, and the reconstruction and deconstruction that was going on in Raleigh, and paralleled that with what the main character and the narrator was dealing with. So that was sort of how this story originally started. One of the things going on in this story is the construction workers hitting a water line and having that water flood into the streets. That actually was based on a memory that I had from my childhood. On my childhood street, there were some construction workers, and they did exactly that. They hit a water line, and this water was just flooding out onto our street. So it was an interesting sort of childhood memory that I pulled in and repurposed in this story. But one of the bigger themes in this story is the idea of God. And I'm not going to talk about any of the religious aspects of it, but more thinking of the idea of God as a symbol for some sort of purpose or overarching meaning in our lives. And whether or not you're religious, many people look for this meaning in a lot of different ways. If something happens in their lives, say like 5 years ago, and then it comes around and suddenly, 5 years later, it looks like, wow, that actually made a huge difference in my life for the better. And I thought it was really bad at the time, but it actually looks like there was some, maybe it appears as though there's some intentionality behind it. And, humans as pattern-seeking creatures, we do this all the time. We recognize things that are happening in our lives, and then we have to find a way to form some sort of narrative around them or some sort of meaning around them. And so this narrator in the story was doing that. He sees all these different things, and then he realizes maybe that was God's plan all along. We can see these catastrophes in our lives, or you lose your job, you go through a breakup, whatever it is, and then you realize, wow, that actually led me to a place where I needed to be, and I would not have gotten there if I didn't go through whatever it was. And at the time when I wrote the story, I wasn't going through anything quite that intense. I had just moved back to Raleigh after almost about a year of living in New York City, And I thought, I thought I was going to live in New York City for a lot longer, but I moved back to Raleigh, and there were a lot of questions that I was asking, just about, am I doing the right thing with my life? Am I going in the right direction? Am I pursuing something for the wrong reasons? And this story helped me sort of formalize and wrestle through some of the things I was feeling. Is there some overarching meaning or some plan behind what's going on in my life? And oftentimes, the things in our lives that happen to us that make us think that there is no plan may in fact be the things that are leading us to a place where we need to be. Oftentimes it's the struggles that we go through and the questions that we ask that lead us closer to figuring out what we need to do and who we need to be. So before I get too far into some sort of philosophical thing here, I'll just stop right there. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I look forward to sharing another one with you next week. A Story Each Day was written by me, Nicholas Voyta Sailer. Music in this episode by Blue Dot Sessions and David Sesday. You can read more of these stories, purchase the collection, or subscribe to hear updates about my upcoming novel by going to astoryeachday.com. Thanks for listening.